Welcome to Geocache Adventures with me, Shadow Dragon 1, where I discuss geocaching and my adventures with it. This interview was recorded using Zoom and may sound different than other podcast audio. Welcome, everybody. I'm here with John, frequently known as Moun10Bike 10 in the geocaching world, who is the father of the Geocoin, the hider of the first geocache in Idaho, the creator of the first geocache traveler, the first reviewer, and also the co-founder and charter vice president of the Washington State Geocaching Association. Thank you so much for coming on here today.
Glad to be here.
You've got quite the impressive geocaching resume. You've done a lot that has really affected the game as we know it, it seems.
It's just being in the right place at the right time. I just happened to be around at the start, and that's why.
So how did you get started into geocaching?
Well, I was big into maps and GPS as a result of my interest in maps, because I was very into mountain biking, as you might guess from my username, and early on used GPS to help with mapping of trails. And so I was involved with a number of news groups. At the time, the internet was kind of in its infancy, so there weren't things like Facebook and the likes. News groups were basically the Reddit of their day, where people could just talk about a variety of different topics. And the one I followed most closely was the one dedicated to GPS navigation. And people started getting really excited in 2000 because at the time, then President Bill Clinton was talking about getting rid of selective availability, which was simply put the spoofing mechanism that was on the GPS signal at that time. And we knew that once selective availability was removed, or SA for short, that all of a sudden our GPSs would be much more not reliable, much more accurate. And for me, that was really interesting because, wow, now for mapping of trails, it was going to be, you'd know, like, oh, it was that ravine that I was in and not that one that was 200 meters over, that right. Sort of thing. So, and then near the turnoff of selective availability, a guy by the name of Dave Ulmer posted, hey, we could probably hide things out in the forest and actually get people to them now with coordinates. It'd be accurate and could do that. And a couple days after selective availability was turned off, he posted that he had done that, and it was the start of geocaching. I really liked that idea, and I wanted to be involved myself. And it was May, which I'm up in Washington State and almost Idaho, and my family and my wife's family have cabins at a lake up in North Idaho, and I knew that's where I would want to hide my own cache. But because there was snow on the ground, I didn't get started for a while. And I actually I don't know if you can see my background, but that was taken from a place where I really wanted to hide my first cache, but that place stays covered in snow until July. And I finally got antsy, and I went up to a secondary place, which I still enjoyed going to, but that's where I ended up hiding my first cache. It's actually, you can't see where I'm pointing, but I guess that hill right there is where I ended up hiding it.
Oh, it certainly is beautiful.
Yeah, I sure like it. So,
just a note, I was able to capture a screenshot of the hill John is referring to in the interview, and you can check that out on the show notes at the website. It really is a beautiful scene.
And that's how I got involved.
So you've been involved pretty much from the very beginning? like all 20 years, or did you start like a year or two later?
No, I started. It was June of 2000 is when I started, and the game started in May.
So,
And I was
okay,
I was involved in terms of reading the posts and such, but waiting for the
right.
snow to disappear is
It's a different story. Yeah. We don't get quite as much snow here in Missouri as they tend to get in some places up north. But we've had a couple good snowfalls, so I can imagine with the sometimes feet that they get in some places up north, it definitely takes a lot longer than the 6 inches to dissipate that we get around here.
yeah. Um, and I'm seeing photos now, and where this picture was taken just about a month ago is now dusted with snow. So
Oh,
it's that
wow.
time of year again. So
So did you actually hide your first geocache before you found your first geocache, or did you?
yeah, no, I hid before finding. At the time, I think there were some. I'm trying to think. Um, I mean, my cache was like roughly the 35th to 40th, somewhere in there, ever hidden.
Wow.
So there weren't that many. And Dave Ulmer's first cache only lasted a handful of months, maybe weeks before, because he actually planted it at the side of a pullout on a road, and the Oregon DOT widened that pullout just weeks after he had hidden it, and so wiped it out almost immediately.
Oh, wow.
I wish I had gotten down there before that happened, but I didn't have the luck. So yeah, I didn't find a cache until September of that year, 2000.
Okay.
And that was at the time I worked for Microsoft, and I was in the games group, and so summer and into September it was usually really busy because that you have to wrap up production on titles to be ready for Christmas with the games.
Mm.
And so I didn't have a lot of time to cache during that period anyway. And then uh, we actually had our ship party in September, and after that was over, I jumped in my car and drove up to that cache. So I'd been kind of waiting to be able to get one, and it turned out to be a cache hidden by the founders of geocaching.com.
Oh, wow.
Uh, so they had gone on a camp out there to celebrate the failing of the business that they were working with during the .com bust. And yeah, and that was the start of it then, for finding at least.
Wow. So how many finds roughly do you have at this point?
About 21,000, which isn't huge. I mean,
It,
there are people who have been in the game for like 3 years who have more than me. So
when you have millions of caches worldwide, in comparison, 21,000 may not seem high, but I hear that number and I think, wow, that's so many.
well, that's just, I mean, remember, I've been in it for 20 years, 21 unique years, like, because I found in 2000, 2001 to on up to 20. So I guess I'm averaging about 1,000 a year, but some people just blow through that in a month. So
I can't imagine I have been doing actively for just over a year now, and I have 153. So that those people that can go out and do 1,000 or even 500 in a year, to me, is just like, wow. It's like sometimes I wish I had that kind of a time to be able to go do that, but obviously we just have different sort of commitments to
yeah, well, actually,
deal
that's
with.
how I
So
feel. I feel like I have commitments that keep me from caching most of the time,
yeah,
but then others, it's all, yeah, it's all relative.
it
So
is. It is all relative to your own life and everything. My husband he's I try to get him into geocaching, but he's not really interested in it. My son is 6, and he's kind of goes back and forth on if he enjoys it or not. So sometimes I have to wait for those unique days where I get a day to myself to go out and hit a
Yeah.
few, or wait until it's like Mother's Day or my birthday and just be like, what I'd really like to do is go find a geocache, and then they feel obligated to
Yeah.
accommodate me. So
Yeah. My wife can't stand it. My son, he'd rather be playing video games. So
yeah. Yeah, it definitely seems to be a niche hobby for sure.
yeah.
I guess most hobbies are really niches for people, but so when you did get to that first hike, you talked a little bit about the location, but what type of container was that?
It was a 5-gallon bucket, and it was because the very first cache by Dave Ulmer was a 5-gallon bucket, and that's what a lot of those early caches were. Nice big things stuck out in the forest.
Not little
And it,
micros.
right, right. And I mean, I'm almost embarrassed because that was so, I was so rigid in my thinking. Back then it was like, well, that's the way people are doing it, so I'll do the same. It's like, and now it's like, oh man, I could have, uh, you know, riffed on it or something, but I don't know. It was so young and new.
Yeah, I'm guessing you probably have a couple other hides at this point.
Yeah, not a huge number. I do have, I guess I don't know how many active. So overall, I think I have about 120 hides. Active ones is probably half that. Um, I tend to like to put them in spots like you see in my background, and so they don't get a lot of finders, and also tend not to get muggled because they're not in busy urban areas. Um, so most of mine have been long lived in, I guess, outdoor, semi-remote areas.
I'm guessing those difficulty ratings are closer to 4s and 5s than
Oh, not that high. Probably 3s and 4s, I
3s and
guess.
4s. Okay.
But yeah, I mean, most of mine are uh, doable. I like knowing that families can do them. Like I have some at at a waterfall, for example, where yeah, you can't drive right to it, but it's just a fairly level trail and maybe a slight scramble to where the cache is. So
Okay. So maybe a bit of hiking, but not necessarily any cliff scaling or anything crazy like that.
yeah, I mean, I guess I have a couple that are more quote unquote epic, um, that I placed on, mountain bike rides or something. But for most of them, no more than a 4 mile, 5 mile hike usually.
Okay. That's doable for most, I think.
I think so. There's so many to pick from now, though. So
Oh yeah, you definitely if you prefer those remote ones, they're out there. If you prefer urban lamppost parking lots, you've got geocaches for all kinds of people out there. So it definitely there's definitely a variety out there for people to pick from. So when you created the first Geocoin, how did that idea come about?
um, there were a lot, as we've been talking, there were a lot fewer caches back then, and about a year into my caching, so it was 2001. We ended up having the first event in Washington State, and at that I was getting close to my 100th find, which was the first significant milestone for me. And it's like I want to do something really interesting for that. And up to that point, people had been leaving. Some people had signature items, and by that, that's what they started to be called. And they were basically ways that as soon as you opened the cache box, you knew that that person had been there.
Mm-hmm.
There was one guy in our area who always left a kid's little kazoo
Oh, okay.
with kind of a metallic metallic finish on it, and it's like, oh, I knew he had been in that cache already just by opening it up. So I wanted something like that, a signature item of my own, and I asked around at that event, that first event, and there was a guy there who had been in the military, and he said to me, "Oh, why don't you mint a coin?" And I remember at the time, I think I actually literally laughed because I thought like, oh my God, the cost, how
Yeah.
crazy would that be? It's like, and no one mints coins except for governments, right? It was just, and he said, no, military challenge coins are really popular, and there are a bunch of companies out there that make them. You send in a design and they mint them, and that really intrigued me because there are a lot of reasons why a coin would be great in a cache. It's easy to carry and it's really durable and all that.
Yeah.
So I started looking online, and I basically found the first one that came up when I searched for minting coins is the one that I ended up calling and talking to the guy, and turned out it really wasn't that expensive. I mean, it wasn't cheap, but it also wasn't like, you didn't need the GDP of a small nation to be able to do it. And so uh, took, I designed the two sides and sent him the designs, and before you know it, I had the coins in hand. So,
How did you come up with the design you ended up using?
well, on the one side, I used a logo that I had created years before for mountain biking, and
Mm.
I was used, since my username was Moun10Bike, I used it as my logo. That's just you see it as my avatar and what have you. And then on the back side, I took the geocaching logo and then altered it to fit around service, because the geocaching logo at the time, it was the four color, four pane design that a lot of cachers are familiar with, with primary colors in green, I
Mm-hmm.
guess. And that was square, so I just kind of adjusted things and made it kind of round or what have you. And that's actually the reason I had to come out with a second version of my coin, was because then geocaching.com said, oh, we can't allow alteration of our logo. So I had to redesign it so that I wasn't, breaking that rule.
Right.
So they're responsible for why there are multiple versions. And then it's like, oh, I can make different versions. Yeah, so that's it. I'm actually, again, just like I'm kind of embarrassed that my first hide was just a 5-gallon bucket. That first coin was so plain because I just didn't know what was available. I didn't know what you could do with coins. And plus I wanted to save a little bit of money with, not having too much color.
Right.
I think I assumed that any color, or you got paid by the number of color, or you had to pay according to the number of colors or whatever. I don't know what it was, but it was like I tried to keep it really simple, to keep the costs down and all. But
Yeah.
I went really simple. So, and nowadays the coin looks so boring compared to what's out there. So
So what iteration is your coin on now? Are we
I'm I still have version 6
version 6? Okay.
that I'm putting out. Yeah, those are going to last me a while. Someone said I should have a new version for the 20th year of the Geocoin, which is next year. But I don't know. I've got so many version 6s. I don't think that's going to happen. Especially with what has happened in 2020, I haven't gotten them out there as much as I used to.
It's been an odd year for everybody, for sure. So could you tell us a bit about the first geocache traveler? I'm assuming that this was sort of what led to trackables.
Yeah, yes, and in a way, I mean, so people had talked about the idea of having some items go from cache to cache. So someone on news groups way back then had already posited the idea, but no one had put it into practice. And so when
Okay.
I hid my cache in June, I said, well, I want to do that. I want to have a hitchhiker. And the thing that immediately came to mind was a children's book that I loved as a kid, which was Paddle to the Sea. And it's the story of a kid who carves out a Indian in a canoe and puts it in a stream and scratches on the bottom or writes, please return me to the water, for I am paddled to the sea. And the goal of the kid was he put it in the Great Lakes and he wanted it to travel all the way to the ocean. And the
Oh.
story is this little carved canoe making its way and different people meeting it along the way. And like one person takes it and paints it. And one person, because the writing on the bottom saying, I'm paddled to sea, please return me to the water, it's getting faded. So he puts a brass plaque on the bottom that says that, and it's like, and you'll have to read the story to see how it ends, but it's heartwarming.
It
And
sounds very neat.
yeah, and I liked that idea, as that was my idea behind a traveler, was to have something that moved and interacted with people along the way, like Paddle to the Sea. There were some problems with the way I initiated it. So I had moved into my first house just a few months prior to geocaching starting. And as a joke, people who came to my house, I had a housewarming, they all gave me obnoxious lawn ornaments and just stuck them all over the yard. Well, one of them was this frog. And it's kind of ironic given that Signal became the mascot for geocaching.com, but it's very Signal looking, or it was very Signal looking. That it was this kind of reclining frog statue thing, and it was huge. I mean, it was probably this big.
Oh my.
But caches were 5-gallon buckets, right? No
Yeah.
problem. So that's what I started as the first traveler. And I say the first traveler because someone had planted the seed of the idea somewhere, and I wish I knew who and where, about having things moving from cache to cache. As far as I know, no one had done it, by the time I hid my cache. And so I say it was the first traveler, just the first known one.
First known one. That makes sense.
But it wasn't a very good traveler because it never made it to another cache.
Oh.
The person took it and then didn't really cache that much afterwards. And then caches already were starting to get smaller. And it just didn't fit. So I did try to start it again with a stash. I called it the stash hopper because back then caches were called stashes, and it was a frog, so
stash hopper.
I called it the stash hopper. Well, I don't know how long later, maybe it was only a year, I tried again with a smaller version, I found a little toy frog and called it the stash hopper too. But it only went 1 or 2 caches, I think, before it was long gone. So.
So how was that tracked back then? If there were no tracking codes on them, was it just by post on the news forums?
Yeah, or just you kind of set it out and you didn't know if you'd ever see it again or hear of it again. I mean, there was no tracking, and so it was all, you just had to hear via log or from word of mouth, that your traveler had made it somewhere or what have you.
Wow. Now we have these web pages with maps. You can see all the places all over the globe that they've been to in just seconds. Wow. So how did reviewing caches come about?
That's another thing. I say I'm the first reviewer, and I may be tied for first, because what
Okay.
happened was Jeremy, who lived in Seattle, I had met him because, cachers, there weren't that many in the early days, and with geocaching.com starting in Seattle and me being in the Seattle area, I naturally linked up with the founders of geocaching.com. And since I was at Microsoft during those days, I donated software to help them start the site.
Oh.
As a result, I had built up a relationship with the founders, and Jeremy initially reviewed all the caches himself. Jeremy being Jeremy Irish, the founder of geocaching.com. And it got to a point at one point in, I think it was 2001, early 2001, where the caches started coming in faster than he could do it. He was the only reviewer in the world, right? He was the founder and managed everything. And at that point, he reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm finding that it's a lot of time. I'm hoping to kind of spread the workload. Would you be willing to review caches as they came in?" And I said, "Oh, absolutely." And when I look at who has so in the database at geocaching.com, you can see when different people first started. Back then, we called them approving caches, but reviewing caches and publishing them. And it's Jeremy, for all the early ones, with a couple weird outliers, like people who weren't reviewers for many years after appear in that early list for some reason. I think just the dates were retroactively applied back then, the way it was. But with the exception of a couple two, you can start seeing the people that Jeremy asked to help pretty much all on the same day getting started.
Okay.
And it was a guy in New York named Cache Ninja and me. And last time I looked, there are no times on those publications, but we both published, I believe, I'd have to confirm again, but I think both of our first publications are on the same day. And so that's why I say I'm tied, because we were both asked to review at essentially the same time and got started at the same time. So
I see. Has reviewing changed much since then?
Quite a bit, yeah. The guidelines back then were virtually non-existent. Basically, I was supposed to look it over, make sure there was nothing obscene, and that it was in a reasonable location. Like if someone said it's in a park and it showed up in the middle of the ocean, you
question that one.
you question it. But the guidelines, as we know them, didn't exist. Not even the buried guideline. There were no proximity guideline, nothing. So it was fairly straightforward. It was mostly just making sure that it was family friendly and matched what was advertised. So quite easy. And I reviewed up until I started working at Groundspeak, which was in 2009. And even during that time, it changed significantly. And now there's so many tools, and we didn't even have decent maps back then. So we had to basically map ourselves based on the coordinates that the users supplied. Excuse me. And then after publication, maps would be generated for the caches.
Okay.
But you couldn't preview where it was and see. The reviewers today now have tools that show them where all the other caches are, including the hidden coordinates of puzzles and the like. So it's really grown. There's a feature that lets reviewers put in polygons for areas that are off limits, and you can see if it's in one of those or if it's in a place that needs a permit or what have you. And there was none of that back then. So
wow.
Yeah, it has changed. And not only that, but now we have over 300 reviewers around the world. Back then, didn't need that many.
It has definitely grown substantially in the past 20 years. If nothing else, it has definitely grown,
Yeah, and
to
this
say the
year,
least.
I mean, the game kind of, the growth kind of plateaued in terms of, caches being hidden and people being involved in logging and what have you until this year. I think the pandemic has, people have learned about geocaching as an activity that you can do during the pandemic, and it's just exploded this year. So
wow.
So in a way, the pandemic has been good for the game. I hate to say it that way, but people, it's an outlet for people. So
that's interesting to hear that, because I know I've heard some people say the opposite, that they haven't been able to go out and geocache this year because of the pandemic. So then to hear that it's actually grown quite a bit during the pandemic is very interesting.
Yeah, it's it depends on your perspective. When you look at the average fines per person, it's slightly down this year, and they tend to be closer to the person's home, meaning people aren't traveling for caching as much, for distance.
Right.
But the number of accounts involved, it has exploded, and that has pushed the total number of fines way over any previous record. So, and we're not even all the way through 2020. So,
well, hopefully all those new cachers will continue to stay active and help the game grow.
That one thing we did see in 2016 after the Pokemon Go craze, we had an explosion at that time of new players, and it didn't last. They were looking for the next fun thing for them, and once they found that, they moved on to the next fun thing. So hopefully this though will end up being people who found a great activity to do during a time when the world kind of had changed, and maybe they'll be more inclined to stick with it once things get back to normal. We'll have to wait and see.
I hope so. So the Washington State Geocaching Association, how did that come about being founded? What caused you to help found?
Gosh, I don't even remember when that was. Probably 2002. We're probably getting more boring for the listeners. So I'll try to be simple with it. Basically, the issue was that the state parks in Washington State started to shut down to geocaching, and it was there was one individual, one ranger, I guess, who was really against the game and was trying to get it closed down in all of the parks, and saying it didn't meet with what the park's goals were. We formed as a way to, that's when we started to realize that we couldn't just be a niche, loosely collected group of people if we wanted to be able to keep geocaching, because that we saw that as the start of what could be a change that would prevent us from ever playing the game. It could stifle the growth of the game, especially as then another parks department or whatever sees what Washington State Parks did and decides to emulate that. So we decided we better band together and try to fight it is too strong of a word. We wanted to form a partnership with them, and kind of through education show what it was all about, the kind of people it attracts, that we're actually good for the parks, that we're the people who love the outdoors. We're not kids graffitiing something that you find on a rock or something. We were planning these caches that are owned by people who love the outdoors and found by people who love the outdoors. So to make a long story short, it took a long time. I guess, though it was quick when you're talking governments. And now the Washington State Parks, they even had a geo tour a few years back, encouraging geocaching and encouraging geocachers to come visit. And so I see it as a success. The club is still going strong, although I'm not involved other than as a member these days. But it's being run by people far more capable than me. So
Well, I'm glad to hear it was a success, because it probably would have just completely died out if parks decided to not allow geocaching. There's so many parks, local parks and state parks and federal parks that have some sort of geocache in them, to think that most of our geocaches wouldn't exist if that was the fact.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it seems like now, see, the trend back then was that, this is this new scary activity, and the whole the initial banning in national parks in the U.S. was due to people not understanding the game. They used to have a thing called morning briefs, NPS morning briefs, and one person, a ranger at a national park, actually a national recreational area in Washington State that's operated by the National Park Service, sent out a brief saying that they had discovered caches buried in the national park, or in that national recreational area. It turns out those caches weren't even buried; they were just hidden under pine needles.
Right.
But the use of the term "buried" just freaked everyone out, and it just became a kind of a domino effect of where it became outright banned in national parks. We've made significant progress there, with some national parks actually explicitly allowing placement of physical geocaches. But that at that time, there was kind of that trend moving towards, this is a sketchy activity that we don't want to encourage on our lands.
Yeah.
And so we knew that we had to buck that trend and turn it around. And I think that overall that's changed significantly in the US and around the world. So
yeah, I think there's still obviously some people are always going to have some misconceptions about anything, but I stumbled across a Facebook group the other day called Geocache is Littering. Let's ban to end it. And it was just kind of heartbreaking, because for me, at least, loving the game so much, it's like, you obviously don't understand what the game's about, or you had a bad experience with one individual or something, to just completely call the whole thing littering. And obviously they're not aware of the cash in trash out events that geocaching hosts.
That's a good reminder of why it's so important that we self-police, and that people report issues with caches that do seem to be abandoned and what have you. The more that we can take care of our own and the playing field, the better off we will be presenting ourselves, especially to these entities that have the ability to shut off our access.
Yeah, and doing these podcasts, I came across the Geocacher's Creed, which I didn't realize was even a thing when I started geocaching, to be honest with you. Were you involved in that at all, or do you remember when that came about?
I was not involved, but I think because I was a reviewer, I felt like I should let the community decide that. But it was born in the forums, and it was basically hammered out there just through people posting ideas and suggestions and what have you. And that was before there were things like Facebook and group. The forums were the place where people talked about geocaching, and it's from that era of the high point of the forums. So,
that's really neat. Warning, this part of the show contains spoilers for the cache that is about to be discussed. Well, at the end of each show, I do a cache highlight, and you have graciously agreed to do the cache highlight for us this episode. The cache you sent me is called Hidden Basin Geocache. Cache ID GC8E22. Difficulty rating 2, terrain rating 5. The description reads, strenuous 3-mile, 3-hour, 5-hour round trip hike to very beautiful hidden basin. Small Tupperware container wrapped in black plastic bag with a granite rock on top for weight. Very good satellite reception here. Hard part should be the hike, not the search. Original contents were Winchester pocket knife, bag of polished rocks, mini multi-function pocket knife, Sacagawea dollar coin, mini first aid kit. Drive the Mountain Loop Highway to the Sunrise Mine Road, just west of Barlow Pass. Drive to Sunrise Mine Road and park here. Hike to Headley Pass and follow trail from there to cache. After finding cache, continue another 45 minutes to the top of Vesper Peak. If you lose the trail as you enter the basin approaching Headley Pass, just hike to north 48 degrees, 00.548 decimals, west 121 degrees, 29.812 decimals to find the trail again. Cross Headley Pass at north 48 degrees, 00.425 decimals, west 121 degrees, 29.853 decimals. Hint, under tree broughs near secondary trail, just a few feet south of main trail, past first campsite before last campsite.
So I always have a hard time when someone says, what's the best one you've ever found? You know, it's like, it's always so hard because there's so many and so many memories from all of them. And in fact, I just did one, a couple of weeks ago that it's fresh in my mind as one of the best ones I've done. Just a great experience. But yeah, Hidden Basin Geocache frequently pops into my head as one of the great ones. And it was a great hike. I forget exactly how long it was, but probably around 10 miles round trip. Not just to the cache. The cache was at not at the base, but in a kind of a cirque below the summit of a mountain in the North Cascades called Vesper Peak. And I went with a good geocaching buddy, and we made that hike. It was a perfect day. It was a crisp, I think it was October. It was crisp, but beautiful and sunny, clear views, views all around the North Cascades. And cache was hidden next to that little basin with a little glacial lake in it below the peak of Vesper Peak. And just, it was such a memorable outing and so gorgeous that yeah, it always sticks in my mind. I took a picture of the guy I was with signing the logbook, and he's sitting adjacent to the trail, and you see the Cascades behind him. And that's always been one of my favorite photos I've ever taken geocaching. Wow. So that's one reason it pops into my head whenever someone asks what my favorite was. So the cache itself, I guess, was straightforward. It was a traditional hidden, and I don't even remember the hide itself. Like if I was back up there trying to help someone to find it, I wouldn't remember where it was, but the location was just so perfect and the conditions so perfect that
yeah, so when I looked it up, it said that this was first hit in September of 2002, and it was still active today. So that alone in itself is impressive that it's still active after 18 years out there. But it also sounds like, so the point of the cache was to kind of get you up to go see this magnificent view and geological feature, and it's a traditional cache. So am I safe in saying that this was probably set up before they had the different cache types?
No, the cache types did exist.
They did exist. Okay.
Yeah, in 2002. So when the site started, there was traditional, multi, and I believe virtual was also available when the site started. And maybe even what was called unknown at that time and is now called mystery, because that was the catch-all. And then the other types have come since then. So with, I guess the most recent at this point, having been technically the Where I Go cache, which now is ages old. We might be seeing some changes in that list coming before too long, though. So a change anyway.
It's interesting. Well, it sounds like it was a spectacular view up there to go see the basin.
Oh yeah, yeah. If you look at the gallery on that cache, you'll see some amazing scenery.
I'll definitely do that. Thank you so much for coming on today and talking with us here. I really do appreciate that. And thank you for everything you've done to help develop the game. You've definitely helped add some very interesting aspects to it for sure, with the geocoins and the travelers and for your work as a reviewer. I appreciate it. I'm sure all the geocachers out there appreciate everything the reviewers do, because we definitely would not be having this game if the reviewers weren't keeping us all in check. So thank you very much for all of that.
You bet. Well, my pleasure, and thanks for letting me ramble.
You've been listening to Geocache Adventures with me, Shadow Dragon 1. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Do you have a topic you'd like to hear discussed? Do you have a geocache adventure you would like to share for the Cache Highlight? Would you like to be a guest on the show? Reach out to me at geocache.adventures.podcast@gmail.com or on the contact page at geocacheadventures.org. You can also check out Geocache Adventures merchandise by visiting the store page at geocacheadventures.org. Thank you for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed this show.